it's a great pleasure for me to launch the JoyLab webinar series from the Center for Rural Development and Technology, IIT Delhi. And we call this JoyLab. We work on frugal innovations, on design and sustainability, on traditional knowledge, on water and sanitation. And in everything that we do, there is a deep sense of empathy and inclusion, a celebration of diversity, an approach of what I call samajikta, parasparta, samriddhi, and saundarya drishti. So we celebrate aesthetics and we celebrate natural abundance. We celebrate the social web and we celebrate interdependence. These are some of the things that really give us tremendous amount of energy and vigor as we pursue research in the Frugal Innovation Joy Lab at Center for Rural Development and Technology, IIT Delhi. I'm very happy that Nalini, who's been with us for several years, doing some amazing work at the grassroots on rural women, how their whole spirit of entrepreneurship is being expressed, how they are making use of whatever ICT devices, systems are available. And this is many years of research that she has done across many states of India. And it is lovely to have her with us today. She's registered as a research scholar. She's in the last stages of writing her thesis at IIT Delhi. And she has a long history of working with grassroots organizations in microfinance, microcredit, organic farming, farmer producer organizations. And she's a consultant in the development sector. And it is a real pleasure to invite Nalini to share with us her thoughts, her reflections from these many years of field work on the theme ICT adoption by rural women entrepreneurs, facts, factors, and framework. Over to you, Nalini.
Thank you very much, sir. I mean, it's an absolute pleasure to be kicking this off. And I can resonate with almost every word you have said, starting from all the words from the VEL class, which made a real impact, the Samriddhi, Parasparta, and all the other things that we learned during that class. And the work that has gone on and I have been involved with, it really brings joy and satisfaction to me. I would say, as you just mentioned, that the PhD is just a coming together of all the things that give you a great level of pleasure. And this has been a very immersive and enriching experience. So just wanted to share some parts of my journey, why I started on this, why I embarked on this, what I learned from this, what has been enriching and immersive, as I said, where I think my future thrust or future endeavors and efforts would be. I don't want to repeat what I said during my synopsis. Many of my co-scholars here on the call were part of that call. So I don't want to go through that again, but just share some highlights from it of what I did in that journey, because my PhD journey may be of some use to other people who are on this call. So I just want to give a small introduction of why I chose this area and where I began my journey and where I am at now. So just some 16 years ago, I was very much a part of the corporate world. I was with a large telecom company called AT&T in Singapore. And we were building big ICT solutions, telecom solutions and managed services solutions for large clients like Citibank and GE and JP Morgans of the world. And somewhere it felt very empty. A paycheck, a dollar paycheck at the end of the month didn't kind of cut it. I wanted to come back to my country. I wanted to see if the same ICT could be applied for rural development to emancipate the lot of in rural India. And that's what brought me back some 16 years ago. And when I came back to India, I think the most fortunate thing that happened to me was that my first assignment as a part of an organization called FINO was with Seva Bank in Ahmedabad. And this is a picture of Ela Bain, whoever recognizes her. Ela Bain Bhatt, in 1972, started what is called the first women's cooperative in India. So this was an extremely fortunate turn that I came back to India and I landed in what was perhaps the foremost organization at that time. And even at that time, I'm talking of 2006, they were already talking about core banking systems. They were already talking about empowering their women on the field with ICTs. So this was an extremely fortunate thing for me because that's where I started. After Seva Bank, my journey took me to several startups. I was a consultant to the World Bank, again, ICT, in the ICT for rural development space, worked with NGOs who worked with farmer producer companies and artisanal producer companies, government departments, even in the Northeast. Partha knows my activities in Meghalaya and what we did there. The role of ICT inclusion and the empowerment of rural women, so kind of somewhere took shape because of all of these associations. And that is why I decided that though from a working level standpoint, one has an idea of, this is happening in the field, it called for something a little deeper. I wanted to research this area more, see what is done, where are the lacunae, where I need to go from here, and hence the thought of doing a PhD. And when I started with this PhD journey, I wanted an institute which had some technical background, and also because it was ICT, there was technicality involved. And I have to share this, but I interviewed for my PhD with 3 different departments in IIT. One said, we don't have a rural focus. One said, we don't look at a people focus, we only look at a technology focus. And finally, I'm very grateful to Sir and CRDT for accepting this as something that allowed me to do a PhD and allowed me to research more into the area, which really brings in livelihoods, which brings in rural development, and which brings in technical ICT. So for me, it was a godsend coming together. So that is where I am at. So here's my background. I don't want to go into it in detail, but the earlier slide with the picture in it was taken outside of Barmer. This is the constituency that I am looking at. Rural women working out of their homes, working on traditional crafts, very frugal, very little that they have going for them. How can ICT help their lot? What can it do for them? So this is in a picture speaks 1,000 words, and this is my 1,000 words. This is a picture I took outside of Barmer in some godforsaken wilderness. 81% of India's workforce is in the informal sector. I won't go through all of this. 64% of this group is engaged in non-agriculture, primarily artisanal, primarily home-based, conventional, low-cost, extremely unorganized and fragmented. It is a secondary source of income for most of them. Most of them are involved in agriculture as the main. And very often, because of migration, it becomes the sole domain of the women, not only to feed the family, but to keep traditional arts alive. And this is what I've learned from my association with Kutch, where literally the burden of keeping traditional arts alive is on the shoulders of the women. So where does ICT come into this? And that is what I really wanted to do next. And if you, I mentioned Seva, if you look at most of the so-called NGOs that are working in this space, they traditionally work in building capacities. They bring women together, they aggregate them, they give them a voice so that they are not individuals working out of homes, but they come together as a collective. There's invariably a microfinance institution involved giving the credit that they require. And then there's a for-profit arm that takes whatever they produce to the market. So in that sense, there is aggregation that happens, and then there's the connection that happens to markets, which was not happening earlier. So in this is where ICTs come in different ways, whether it's with the NGOs, whether it is with the MFI, or is it or with the for-profit. So this is what we were looking at, saying where is ICT in rural India? Traditional IT really didn't take off in rural India because of education levels. There was a digital divide, but mobile phones have a whole different story to tell, wide acceptance, social interactions. Now with phones, new phones having IT and the C convergence and broadband availability, most of what we thought would happen with conventional broadband in the ground has all happened with mobile broadband. Steady increase in mobile and internet users. I mean, there are myriad reports that saying the number of women broadband users in rural India is growing by far. But there is still a huge gap in terms of demand for broadband vis-a-vis occupation. It is still being used more for social interaction, sharing photographs, sharing recipes, sharing entertainment, but there is still a low acceptance as far as technology is concerned. So this is where we wanted to work. I wanted to work, and going to the next slide. So in essence, I presented this. My research was an exploratory study to examine the factors that are influencing adoption by women entrepreneurs in non-farm sector in rural India as a livelihood enabler. What are they doing with it? How is it enabling their livelihoods? And next slide, please. So one thing I have learned is whenever you start on something, I was very clear this was the background I was coming from. I had, as I said, from my work and my experience, I knew what I wanted to do. But it's in any academic exercise, it is very important to find your tethers in literature review. You want to see what has already happened, what have people written about. So I wanted to get as much literature review, and I still continue to do that, to kind of substantiate and to ratify what I was already thinking. So I was looking at collectives, ICTs in rural livelihoods, theories on technology acceptance. So these were the areas that I was looking at. And plenty of people have already written about, how collective enterprises offer women entrepreneurs the resilience and the vitality to seek change, how women think of other women first when it comes to starting an entrepreneurship or lifting their lot, and how communities are coming together. So a lot of this has already been written about, and it kind of substantiated what I was already thinking. Next slide, please. And then there was ICT as an enabler. It has happened in different parts of the world. There were people who were talking about how ICT is the most effective tool to bring about gender and economic development. And technology is central to everything we do, and therefore is central to our inclusion in society. And ICT today, as we all know, has really become a general purpose technology, just like electricity, which I will touch upon later. But lots of people have written about it, and this just kind of gave me the ability to put contours around what I wanted to research. Next slide, please. So I won't go through this. These are various theories that have already been written about, and the idea was to take these theories and say, are they applicable to India or in the constituency that I'm talking about? Or is there needs to kind of make a little changes to the framework, where what can we add to it to make it more representative of what we are studying? Next slide, please. So the scope of study, and this is what we wanted to do, the objectives, the plan, and the factors influencing it, ICT adoption, framework for study. I think the plan was vital. The goals were more vital, because plans I have seen, though I have not strayed away from my original plan that I presented in 2015, it has evolved over a period of time. It has taken, it has been fine-tuned, and it has been changed accordingly. But the goals have remained. The goal was always to study this constituency and how they are using ICT and where we can take them from here to make it an even better enabler than it is today. So that goal hasn't changed. Various other things have changed. But just to reiterate, the objective was always to study the adoption of ICT as a livelihood enabler, looking at factors influencing such adoption, and studying the original acceptance model, technology acceptance model, looking at where it needs to be appropriately changed to validate what is happening in India, and to determine the policy implications of the adoption factors to further enhance this adoption. So, I mean, I won't go through this. Every plan, every PhD plan will always have literature review, will have field work, and will have analysis. My pilot study was very interesting. It was the first time I was actually going out with a bunch of questions and questionnaires, something that I was not used to. I had to sit down with a whole bunch of women in Udaipur. This is an organization called Sadhana. This is a loose federation of women artisans in Udaipur and Rajsamand. They are spread across many villages in these two districts. And I had to sit down with many people and ask them, how are you using phones? And it was very interesting because there are 43 groups spread over 16 locations. They have a central point. So it was talking to management, it was talking to supervisors, it was talking to the ladies. And these are just some of the pictures. I went out into some of the villages to sit down with the ladies to ask them what they're doing. And it was quite fascinating. They're all involved in embroidery and applique work. They work out of their homes. And the supervisors, the 50-odd supervisors, talk to these 750-odd women using not only voice telephony, but they also use Facebook and they use WhatsApp. And this was like 4 years ago. And it was fascinating to me. So this was the pilot study I did. The next slide, to just share something, interviewed management staff, supervisors, and about 50 members. Most of them had stopped schooling at about the secondary level, but there was at least one smartphone in every family, and the children had taught their mothers and sisters how to use mobile applications to share photographs and messages. And this is the kind of analysis that we got at the end of it. Mobile ownership, at least 43 of the 50 we talked to had. At least 14 knew how to use it themselves. 36 knew how to use it, but were getting their children to help them. Most of them had been taught by family members, especially the children. And the influence of youth in the family was absolutely pronounced. I mean, in almost every family, that is where the formal learnings of how to use ICT had come from. And I realized that the organization had no real say in this. There was no real push from them. There was no formal training. There was no sit down, let's tell you or train you on how to use it. Most of it had come organically evolved in doing this. And some artisans had actually graduated to using software for designing, for tracking, for management, and even for logistics. And it was fascinating to see how the whole family had come together to use ICT for better work prospects. Next slide. So in looking at all these factors, I came up with this set of factors that are pushing acceptance. So this is where the formal theories of technology acceptance needed that bit of tweaking to better fit an Indian context in terms of factors like availability, factors like accessibility, factors like affordability. How many women can afford this? Factors of adaptability. These are illiterate women. Many of them don't know any formal language. There is no local language interface. So how can it be adapted for them? Is it applicable to the work they do? Can they actually use it for designing, for example? They're embroidery people. How can they send pictures or samples? How can that be done? So all that came together in a formal framework from an academic perspective, taking the technology acceptance model as the core. All of these other factors came into this. And one factor that I didn't mention was the subjective norms and self-image. These are two things that I haven't mentioned. All these applicability and all are fine, but the subjective norms is the coming together of the community, how the community comes together to influence your decisions on taking. Sir talked about empathy. When you look at a woman in a rural setting, for her to use a phone to talk to a customer is a huge challenge. I mean, and it is a huge leap of faith. It is not easy for them to pick up a phone and converse with somebody they don't know. So who influences them to do it? What are the subjective norms that come together to give them the strength and the self-image and the confidence to say, I can manage my own business? Somewhere ICT is, the use of ICT is also influenced by how they have come around to gaining in self-confidence. These are those small empathy factors that we gain only when we go out onto the field and actually talk to people. Next, please. So then started the data collection and methodology, the organizations targeted. I just to give you a broad picture, because of this pilot study and the literature review, I came up with 3 sets of questionnaires, very broad questionnaires for the management of these cooperative organizations where these women have joined, a very detailed questionnaire for the supervisors, many of whom who had risen from the ranks, and a very simple questionnaire for the women members on how they use ICT, whether they are benefited from it, what is the challenges they face. All this was coded. And of course, there was discussions also with experts in the area who have been working in this space for a long time. So just in terms of field data collection, table of interviews, this perhaps was the most interesting part of my journey. I mean, I absolutely enjoyed talking to all the women that I met, all the organizations I met. So just in the next slide, I have just put a table. These are all the organizations I have met, and I continue to meet because I'm also involved with another initiative called the Bharat Inclusion Initiative. So I continue to talk to people who are out in the field. I've done a lot of work recently with Kutch, the Shroff Foundation, a lot of work going on in Tamil Nadu with Digital Empowerment Foundation. So all that kind of comes together. But to me, this was perhaps my field work was perhaps the most wonderful part of this PhD journey for me, just talking to them and gaining more. Just a few pictures. This is Appropriate Technology India. This is in Guptkashi, and it was fascinating going and sitting in the villages. Then there was Avni in Berinag in the Kumaon district. And this was Ribhoi outside of Meghalaya. These were places I visited, and I was quite fascinated by how they have been using technology. These were some dangerous things I did. This was hugely Nakshal infested areas in Jharkhand. I mean, I still feel like Rambo when I say I visited those places, but it was very, very fascinating to talk to women and how, because of the Nakshal problem and other problems, they depend so much on their phones. These are small-time entrepreneurs with kirana dukans and lakh work that they do on the lakh collection and lakh processing. But it is fascinating to see how they have adapted ICT for their use. The unfortunate thing was, thanks to COVID, I couldn't travel after that. I was stuck. I wanted to do a lot more traveling, but hopefully before I end my journey, I'll be able to do some more traveling. The data analysis, and I'll just quickly skim through this, was then collecting all this. The questions in the questionnaires were mapped to individual factors in the framework. So the framework became very important because everything is tethered back to that. You need like a central post to which you can bring all your data and statistically analyze this, the study results of individual factors. And I will not go into great details, but the next slide, availability is still a huge issue in India. I mean, we will be shocked. There are areas with total digital darkness. Though I can statistically say 97% of the women we talked to had phones and were ready to do business on it, there are places I visited where there was absolutely no signal. So it is sad, but it is still a truth. Voice telephony has become ubiquitous, but there is still a challenge of getting connectivity, especially if you have a smartphone and you want to do more data-driven work than just voice work. So even though 100% of the supervisors we met said they had phones, most of them, at least 50+% of them had smartphones or access to smartphones, there was no way they could do anything without connectivity. Next slide. Access was again same thing. Computers are almost non-existent. Also because of the power crisis in rural India, they will tell you that there is a computer in the panchayat office and that is it. It is there. But now almost everything is centered around the phone. In some places, even charging a phone has become a problem. Still continues to be a problem, but there's both comfort and satisfaction in the fact that they have a phone in their hand and they are able to reach out to the rest of the world. I have seen pockets in Pune, in Maharashtra, where I was told that women just wanted to use phones to talk to themselves within the group, within the community. It was immaterial whether they had internet access to the outside world, but the fact that there was an intranet that allowed them to communicate for work and for personal issues within the community was itself a big thing for them. So accessibility is not being mandated, but it is becoming a very important thing for most women because it directly impacts their confidence to deal with the rest of the world. Again, affordability, there are some states like Jharkhand. I was very impressed that the government has started giving out smartphones to women SHG members, especially SHG group, heads, but it is still smartphones hoping that are still prohibitive in cost, but hoping that with what Jio is doing in pushing feature phones and smartphone-like feature phones, this will become more affordable for most people. Applicability helped them with their work. They could browse information. It was very interesting that even in a small village in Kadalur, they were talking about Instagram and how you can get designs from Instagram, how you can get training videos from YouTube. So it is all informal. Even now, I would still say the bulk of what ICT is doing in rural India is informal for the women because they, on their own initiative, are using ICT for their purposes. It is still not mandated by the organization. There is still the absence of an overall strategy to make this affordable and applicable, but women have taken the initiative to do this themselves, and it is interesting because they are doing training and capacity building. They're building relationships with customers using WhatsApp. So it is informal, but it was fascinating to me that on their own team they were able to do all this. Hello?
Yes, you're audible, Nalini. Go ahead.
Yeah, next slide, please. Adaptability, again, as I said earlier, WhatsApp for customer interactions, YouTube for training and capacity building. Had started, most of them. Yeah, I mean, women in many of the bigger states have become extremely comfortable with using Google Pay and Paytm for their activities. Social media use is very interesting. It started off with being used for entertainment. Most of the women I spoke to had started YouTube because they wanted entertainment, but it had that familiarity made it that much easier for them to start looking for training videos, creating training videos. We've been talking to people very interestingly who are using community radio now to disseminate information, and it's a two-way street. women are adding content, women are receiving content. So their familiarity, because of entertainment and because of family pressures, have made it that much easier for them to kind of experiment with social media for livelihood purposes. The advantages, I don't have to go through this. It has helped, they will all tell you that it has saved them time, it has saved them travel and money, it has lowered their cost, it has helped them. It is still a very big thing in rural India to be able to conform to socio-cultural norms. These don't get, many of them don't get to travel much because of cultural issues. So it becomes becomes a big thing for them to be able to conduct their businesses without leaving their homes. So and they receive business relevant information. They are able to interact with strangers, which is a big thing for a woman in rural India, that she is able to do business with somebody totally unknown, which is something that never strikes us till you start speaking to them. And that is another empathy factor which comes, because you realize that they are sometimes in such isolated pockets. Talking to somebody from a village in Assam to somebody in Delhi as a customer is a huge issue for them. But the fact that ICT has been able to bridge that is something that is a huge advantage for them. Subjective norms, I've already mentioned that there is a lot of peer support, there's a lot of family support. It has all positively impacted their image, their levels of self-confidence. So, I mean, these are not, whether it is directly impacting their livelihoods or it is impacting their inclusion into the society they are as part of, it makes a huge difference for them. And it is very interesting because one thing I realized when I was doing this is that it's a two-way street. You think that when a woman gets confidence, she gets a phone, but but also in the society, once she has a smartphone, society gives her more responsibility. The associations give her more responsibility because she is more familiar with a tool that can emancipate the rest of the group. So it is it's kind of building the confidence of the whole group, which is something that we don't realize till we actually sit down with them. And they will tell you that I got a smartphone and now the society is giving me more responsibility, so I'm getting more money, so I am better off, and the other ladies are very, very inspired by what I have done. So those kind of small things you don't realize till you start talking to them and sitting down with them. So acceptance and use, majority of the ladies interviewed have been using it for many years, but slowly have gone on to the smarter phones where they are using social media. The internet access was primarily on a smartphone. There's no, as I said, computers and traditional IT as we knew it is passé, as they would say, really not there anymore. Most of them have also started becoming very familiar with banking applications. The MFIs are teaching them how to use their own phones for MFI, for microfinance purposes. So almost their whole lives are now slowly getting built around the phone. Next slide, please. The challenges still, as I said, network connectivity is still a challenge. I mean, despite we've been a mobile country since 1994, I was very much a part of the activities when the first mobile networks went into the country in 1994. I was part of AT&T when all the main switches went in. But there are still places in India, some 26 years later, which are digitally dark. And that is quite a shame, I would say, that the big companies are not seeing enough business in these places and not putting networks in there. 200 to 400 is what they're spending on a monthly basis. It is still expensive for a poor lady, but several of them said that they've had no training, and if they had training, they would use it a lot more. Like local language is still an interface. Socio-cultural norms in some places, like in Kutch, for example, we found that women were not not allowed in many areas to use a phone unless there was a male member with them. So these are broadly the challenges. And I would say, as far as my journey is concerned, the fact that I was able to speak one-on-one to almost all of the women that I have researched, and they're close to about 250 people I have spoken to, the fact that I was able to talk to one-on-one with most of them and not use other people to collect my information was a hugely enriching experience for me, because you heard it from the horse's mouth. And as a woman, I felt it was that much more, they were that much more comfortable with talking to me as opposed to somebody else I could have used to get that data for me. It would have been much easier for me and a lot less problematic, but I didn't do that. So I would jump into the results, conclusions, recommendations. Rural women have been quick to realize the power of ICT. They know what it is all about. There's a high level of utilization. When World Bank talks of ICT, they talk about a whole spectrum which goes from radio to mobile applications, broadband, the whole gamut. And almost everything in some pocket or the other, you'll find people using, whether it's community radio, whether it is satellite-based communication, whether it is actual broadband in the ground or mobile broadband, social media applications. All of this is happening. The collectives have no active plans, or even if they have active plans, they have very little money to, or credit lines to actually establish their own ICT networks. But as somebody from Microsoft Labs rightly pointed out, COVID and Geo have been huge game changers, because now, I mean, this is a new paradigm, and a new thinking is required. I wanted to put this picture in. This is a group we've spoken to. This is a group out of Kutch. You see the lady in the center. Her name is Pabiben Rabari. Pabiben Rabari, they do embroidery in the Kutch area. And by the way, Pabiben Rabari has her own website. It's called pabiben.com. And she sells products from 150 women artisans in the Kutch area. So that is the power of ICT. This was an isolated woman in somewhere outside of Anjar in Kutch. She got together a whole group of women, and an organization out of Ahmedabad called Karigar Clinic helped her set up pabiben.com. And now they have pabiben.com, they have rajiben.com, and artisans in these groups gather together around her under the brand name of pabiben.com, and actually are reaching the world. Today, her turnover is in lakhs thanks to a website. It's a great leveler. It's an economic enabler. We all know it, but the demand is not being met. Approach to understanding ICT is still very fragmented. Different groups are doing different things. But one of the things that I'm involved in is looking at use cases in various pockets like the ones I just mentioned, and seeing how it can be replicated in other parts of the country. So there are a lot of organizations that are doing fabulous work. Sir knows some of them, like Gramvani, Digital Green, Grammark. We are trying, and Digital Empowerment Foundation. We are looking at how we can take their activities and actually take it to the rest of the country under the Bharat Inclusion Initiative. And next slide, please. So the recommendation is more for a comprehensive ICT strategy. As I said, it's now a general purpose technology. It's like electricity. If we have electricity grids in every part of the country, we should really be investing in looking at how we can have an ICT grid across the country so that everybody is covered. Today, there are a large number of pockets that are not. The digital inclusion of women is a precursor to very, very many things, whether it be health, it may be maternity and child welfare, whether it be livelihoods, whether it be social, whether it be financial inclusion. Digital inclusion of women is now an imperative. It is no longer something that we can afford to put off. There are a lot of NGOs working, as I just mentioned, the improved availability of access. Using NGOs should be looked at and see how we can serve more underserved areas. Credits are still not available from any bank for spreading digital inclusion. It is most of these so-called NGOs, including Digital Empowerment Foundation, which is working on the ground, is looking for grants from larger organizations, hoping that they can do this on a mission mode basis. But it is still not something which the government is actively funding. So these are my recommendations. The next slide, please. So future research, I'm looking at use cases to be replicated, maybe look at action research, take one organization like a Sadhana, where I did a pilot project, see how we can build a comprehensive strategy for them, and see if we can then take the strategy across to other organizations. Support smaller organizations with hardware. It is becoming very expensive for them. I spoke about that small organization in Kadalur. Tried to see how we can get them second-hand phones so that they can spread ICT. And so it is becoming very difficult for them to do it. So there is the financial constraints associated with it. So my last slide. This is my journey, and I just wanted to share a few insights. This has been an extremely immersive and enriching experience for me because, as I said, I was out on the field, and that is exactly what I wanted. I wanted to look at what it is like on the ground. My main aim was to make a difference, and whether to learn and to cross-pollinate ideas, and that has happened, to meet and to connect different groups. I have been able to connect different groups of people who I've met, whether it be solution providers, whether they be organizations on the ground. And this has been a journey that has helped me to meet a lot of people and to be able to connect them for the betterment of both parties, and to gather enough perspective to be able to drive policy change. So, I mean, at the end of the day, yes, I will, and by God willing, I will have a thesis, but this has been much more than a paper document. It has been a very enriching experience for me, and it sets me on a good stead for whatever I want to do in the future. And within IIT, the opportunity to work with students and motivate them was extremely satisfying. One of the things that I will always look back with a great deal of happiness was a movie we made on the unorganized sector as a part of the RDL class. And it was I with 15 other students, and we went and spoke to diverse groups within Delhi, and we brought it all together as a movie on the unorganized sector. And for me, at my age, it was fascinating to see the zeal that younger students have, younger generation has in addressing issues that need change. And the coming together was something that really motivated me. I want to continue to bring more young people together to build this digitally empowered India that we are talking about. So in short, I would say just immerse yourself in this. At the end of the day, lots of doors will open. You'll meet lots of new people. The exercise in itself is enriching. The journey is enriching. At the end of the day, whatever document comes, and you will have an initial plan, and it'll either get fine-tuned or it'll get expanded or it'll narrow. It'll keep on happening. I mean, it is like a very pulsating universe that you will go through in this whole journey. You'll get data, then you'll meet some more people. There will be more inputs coming in. And it's just that the whole, just go with the flow. And at the end of the day, if you can make a difference in whatever area you're working on, I mean, that to me would be the greatest contribution that you can make to this country. And with that, I'd like to say, Digital India has become a way of life, as Modi says, and Prime Minister Modi says, and it is empowering women. And I'm happy about that. Thank you.